A 7-year-old girl in a torn yellow sundress sprinted barefoot across the gravel parking lot of a roadside diner, tears streaking down her dust-covered cheeks, screaming the 6 words that would stop a dozen leather-clad bikers cold in the middle of their Saturday morning coffee stop: "They're beating my mama, please help." Before we continue, if you believe in kindness and second chances, take a moment to like this video, drop a comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Kindness Inspire, because this story is about to show you that sometimes the toughest-looking strangers carry the gentlest hearts. The little girl's name was Rosalind, though everyone would come to know her simply as the brave child who ran for help that morning. She lived 2 streets behind Denny's diner in a modest rental house with her mother, Wilhelmina Castro, a 31-year-old woman who worked double shifts at a fabric warehouse to keep a roof over their heads. Wilhelmina had been in a relationship for the past year with a man named Thaddeus Corbin, a relationship that had started, by all outward appearances, warmly enough, but had slowly curdled into something Wilhelmina found herself trapped inside before she fully understood how deep the trap had become. Thaddeus was controlling in ways that crept up gradually, isolating her from friends, criticizing her constantly, and in recent months, the arguments had begun escalating into something far more frightening than raised voices. That Saturday morning, Wilhelmina and Rosalind had walked to the diner for a rare treat of pancakes, one of the small joys Wilhelmina tried to preserve for her daughter despite the growing tension at home. Thaddeus had followed them, unannounced, having spotted them leaving the house, already agitated about an argument from the previous night that had never fully resolved. He confronted Wilhelmina in the parking lot behind the diner, out of view from the main dining room windows, his voice rising quickly from irritation into something harder and more frightening. Rosalind, waiting nearby with her small hands pressed to her ears, watched the confrontation escalate into something physical, something she had unfortunately witnessed enough times before to recognize immediately as danger, and without thinking, she ran. She ran toward the only people she could see who looked, in her 7-year-old understanding of the world, big enough and strong enough to help, a group of 11 bikers parked along the side of the building, gathered around their motorcycles during a routine Saturday morning ride, drinking coffee and talking before continuing their route. The bikers belonged to a local charity riding club called Steel Guardian Riders, a group of mostly middle-aged men and women who spent weekends raising money for children's hospitals and veterans' services between long stretches of highway riding. Their apparent toughness, the leather vests and tattooed arms and weathered faces, had never once meant unkindness, and Rosalind's instinct, though she couldn't have explained it in words, proved entirely correct. The club's president, a 52-year-old man named Roscoe Hendricks, a broad-shouldered man with a graying beard and kind, deeply lined eyes, was the first to kneel down to Rosalind's level as she gasped out her plea between sobs. He didn't hesitate, didn't waste precious seconds asking unnecessary questions. He simply stood, called out sharply to the group, and moved with the rest of them toward the back of the diner at a speed that startled even the diner's kitchen staff who peered out through the delivery door to see what the commotion was about. What they found in the parking lot was Wilhelmina on the ground, Thaddeus standing over her mid-argument, his posture aggressive and his voice still raised. The moment he registered 11 bikers rounding the corner of the building, his posture shifted instantly from aggression to alarm, but it was too late for retreat. Roscoe positioned himself immediately between Thaddeus and Wilhelmina, his voice calm but carrying an authority that filled the entire parking lot, informing Thaddeus that this ended right now, that Wilhelmina was safe, and that the police were already being called by one of the other riders standing a few feet away with a phone already pressed to her ear. Thaddeus attempted to argue his way out of the situation, insisting this was a private matter, that none of them had any right to interfere in a domestic disagreement, but Roscoe's response was steady and unmoved. A 7-year-old girl running for help in tears made this everyone's business the moment she asked for it. 2 other bikers, a woman named Maricela Duval and a man named Ignatius Reyes, moved quietly to Wilhelmina's side, helping her sit up, speaking gently, asking if she was hurt, keeping their bodies angled protectively between her and Thaddeus without a single wasted motion. Rosalind ran to her mother's side as well, sobbing with relief now rather than fear, and Maricela wrapped a spare jacket around the little girl's shoulders, murmuring reassurance while keeping careful watch on the tense standoff still unfolding a few feet away. Local police arrived within 6 minutes, and by that point, the situation had been entirely stabilized by the group's calm, unified presence, Thaddeus having realized any attempt at further aggression would accomplish nothing against 11 people who showed no sign of backing down. He was taken into custody on the spot, facing charges related to the assault. The responding officers documented from Wilhelmina's visible injuries and the corroborating accounts of numerous witnesses, both from the bikers and from diner staff who had since gathered near the doorway. If this story is touching your heart right now, please take a moment to like this video and leave a comment sharing your thoughts, because what happens next reminds us that community and courage can rebuild a life once thought unsalvageable. In the aftermath, the Steel Guardian riders did something that extended far beyond that single Saturday morning intervention. Roscoe, having handled similar situations before through the club's charitable work, connected Wilhelmina with a local domestic support organization that specialized in emergency housing and legal advocacy for situations exactly like hers. Maricela, who worked during the week as a paralegal, personally helped Wilhelmina navigate the confusing early stages of filing for a protective order, sitting with her through hours of paperwork that would have otherwise felt impossibly overwhelming to face alone. The club as a whole, moved by Rosalind's courage and Wilhelmina's quiet strength, organized a modest fundraiser over the following month, raising enough to cover a security deposit on a new apartment across town, one with better locks, better neighbors, and considerably more distance from Thaddeus's reach. Wilhelmina struggled in the weeks that followed, not just with the practical logistics of rebuilding a life interrupted, but with the deeper emotional work of understanding how she'd arrived at that parking lot in the first place, how gradually the relationship had shifted from affection into control, how easily isolation had crept into her life without her fully recognizing the pattern until her daughter was the one forced to recognize danger and act on it. She began attending a support group recommended by the domestic advocacy organization, sitting nervously through her first few sessions before slowly finding her voice among other women who understood exactly what she'd lived through without requiring lengthy explanation. Rosalind, for her part, seemed to carry the experience with a resilience that surprised the adults around her, though the support organization connected her with a child therapist who specialized in helping young witnesses process exactly this kind of trauma, ensuring her bravery that day didn't quietly calcify into unprocessed fear as she grew older. The Steel Guardian riders, rather than disappearing from their lives once the immediate crisis passed, became an unlikely extended family for both mother and daughter. Roscoe checked in weekly, first out of protective habit and eventually out of genuine friendship. Maricela continued mentoring Wilhelmina through the slow legal process that eventually secured a permanent protective order. The entire club showed up, nearly a dozen motorcycles strong, for Rosalind's 8th birthday 6 months later, presenting her with a small leather vest of her own, embroidered with the words, "Junior Guardian," which she wore with a pride that made her mother's eyes fill with tears every single time she saw it. Before this story ends, if it moved you even a little, please comment the word "Guardian" below, because sometimes the family who saves us isn't the family we're born into, but the one who simply chooses to show up when we need them most. A year after that terrifying Saturday morning, Wilhelmina had rebuilt a life she once feared was permanently out of reach, working a stable job with better hours, living in a small but genuinely happy apartment with her daughter, surrounded by a community of unlikely protectors who had never once treated their intervention as a burden or a favor owed repayment. Rosalind still remembered, with startling clarity for a child so young, the exact moment she decided to run toward the bikers instead of hiding, some instinct in her recognizing that people who looked strong enough to be frightening were sometimes exactly the people brave enough to help. What began as a little girl's desperate sprint across a gravel parking lot became, in the end, the beginning of an entirely new life, proof that courage sometimes arrives wearing leather and riding motorcycles, and that the bravest voice in any crisis can belong to someone barely tall enough to reach an adult's waist.